Welcome to Students of Aging, the podcast that honors the incredible journeys and stories of seniors growing older. Tune in and become a part of our community as we redefine what it means to age gracefully and purposefully.
Is about my independence, my continued, hopefully, independence, and my freedom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Young, and I'm a member of the Seniors Advisory Council for Wood Green Community Services. Our members are creating a series of podcasts called Students of Aging. These podcasts are funded by the Government of Canada. These podcasts are intended to address issues pertinent to older adults. If you're a new viewer or listener, welcome. If you've seen or heard our podcast before, welcome back. My guest today is Jania Zapotoski. Jania is also a member of the Seniors Advisory Council. Welcome.
Thank you.
Our podcast is about aging and seniors. I think you have some expertise in that subject. Let's start with where you were born and when.
Probably should state my age, which is 87. I was born in Rouen, Quebec in 1937. My parents were Tatiana Karpuk, and my father was George Zapotoski. The two of them were immigrants. They were both Ukrainian. But my mother came from Ukraine and my father came from Romania. My grandfather came to Canada in 1925, and his plan was to earn enough money to buy his brother's farm, because his brother didn't like to farm.
Right.
And my grandfather had no land.
Right.
So that was the plan. And my grandfather, in addition to supporting his family, who were still in Ukraine, paid off this debt. And when it came time to take possession, his brother reneged.
Having already taken the money.
Having already taken the money.
Wow.
So my grandfather managed to save up enough money to bring the rest of his family. And that's when my mother and my grandmother came, but it was 9 years later. And my mother was 17 at the time. And so she didn't get to go to school because it was too late.
Right.
And she worked as a domestic with one of her sisters. But my grandmother was 43. And it's her story to tell because she couldn't speak the language, never did learn English, never learned to read and write even in Ukrainian because girls didn't go to school.
No.
So she came to Canada at 43, an old woman. The man she was meeting was a stranger to her. When they arrived in Halifax, they took a train to Armstrong, Ontario, where my grandfather was working for the Canadian National Railway, which, first of all, he had been sponsored by his uncle in Saskatchewan and worked as a farmer, and then got the opportunity to work in Armstrong. So they had to rebuild their lives, and it was very difficult for her. I think the best time in Canada for her was when my grandfather retired. And the family came to live with my parents. And my mother was a caregiver. Her mother was very precious to her. So my mother did the caregiving. She shopped for my grandmother. She invited neighbors in to entertain my grandmother, play cards. The adventurous part of my grandmother came out when there was a family party, because most times she was in chronic pain. But when there was a party, she had one drink and danced on the table. My mother came with her mother and 3 other siblings in 1934. And my grandfather had been in Canada for 9 years previous to that. And my father sailed to Canada at the age of 21 in 1928. So my father had a mind of his own. And he was very determined he wasn't going to do farming. He took the train from Ukraine through Germany and Belgium and then sailed to Canada. And when he arrived, he got on another train from Halifax to Montreal and they were going through northern Ontario and Quebec, and he was determined to get off in North Bay. So you can imagine this peasant who didn't have too much. It cost $175 for his voyage, and he had to have $25 in his pocket to show to the Canadian authorities.
Yes.
But he was determined to get off in North Bay because he'd heard there was work there, and then there were also Ukrainians there. So he put on layers of clothing and shoved his little suitcase away and walked out with his hands in his pocket, with the police actually monitoring people so they wouldn't get off the trains like my father did. And then what he did was he searched for people who spoke Ukrainian and found a Ukrainian family who took him in for the night. And that was the beginning of his journey.
They were brave men and women.
Very, very.
They really launched themselves into the unknown,
Absolutely.
like you say, with nothing.
He had a choice. I mean, he was the youngest in his family, but I imagine he was doing farming as well.
Yeah.
Before he left.
Yeah. What would life have been like had he stayed home?
Tragic in a way, because he was a kid when the First World War started. He didn't have much of an education, and I think people knew that they would have a better life in Canada. And then obviously the ones that stayed behind went through the Second World War.
We know how that ended.
Yeah.
So, where did you grow up? Where did you spend your childhood?
I grew up in Val-d'Or, where my family moved 3 years after I was born. And my father was a miner. It was an interesting childhood because I think we had a lot of freedom in those days. Unfortunately, my mother had some mental health issues after my youngest sister was born. It was a difficult birth, and she went through shock treatments. So I think we had more freedom than we would have had, because when she came back, she went to Montreal for treatment. And when she came back, she wasn't emotionally there.
Right.
And we just ran wild. Well, I was the eldest, so it would have been me and my friends. It was a small town, and we had a lot of forest and wood, berries and whatever. And as long as we were home, by the time my father got home from work, and in those days the whistle blew, the town whistle blew at 7 o'clock, which meant that children had to get off the streets. And we used to pretend we were in a circus, and we just made up things. It's totally different than today, obviously. We didn't have a television at the time,
Right.
We had a radio.
Right.
So my family listened to CBC Radio Canada. And the thing about my family, which was really helpful, is the door was always open to my friends. We never locked our door, even at night. Kids just came over, and each of us had friends.
Yeah.
And my parents were very welcoming. And you don't go into a Ukrainian household without being fed.
That's right.
The apples were on the porch
Yeah.
in a barrel.
Wow.
Yeah. And I thank my parents. I didn't thank them at the time, but
Now you do.
I'm thankful to them.
And I assume you spoke Ukrainian?
I did. In fact, I didn't know English until I started school.
Okay. Was that difficult?
At the time, I didn't think so. When I started school, I just learned English in a hurry. I was 6, and a lot of my friends had been Ukrainian, so it opened up my whole world, because now I had friends who were Polish, Finnish, Italian, Ukrainian, French, and English.
Were you shocked?
No, it was normal. It was
Okay.
the normal thing. I think today, looking back, I might be shocked, but it was, the town was hiring miners.
Sure.
And they were all immigrants, It was wonderful.
Okay.
Looking back on it, it was wonderful.
There was no prejudice amongst the kids.
Not that I know that I didn't feel
Right.
that. I didn't
Right.
feel that. Well, I went to Percival County High School, and it was called County High School because now it included not only people from Val-d'Or but neighboring towns, and they were bussed in, and so my world opened up. For the most part, I think it was a wonderful time as well. We were boy crazy. We loved clothes, but there weren't too many clothes to have. So my friends and I traded clothes. We wore each other's clothes, and nobody thought of it as something strange.
So you were normal kids.
We were normal kids. Normal for that time.
Sure.
And again, my friends were welcome in my home.
Yeah.
And I went to dances, loved dancing. I was also part of the Ukrainian community when I was younger and even in high school. So it was a full life. I can't say I was a good scholar because I found part of it as I found school boring. It was like, history was all about dates. Geography was like a big map
That's
that you
right.
pulled down and
That's
a pointer
right.
that pointed.
Yeah.
And so, and my father was so intent on our having an education, not being educated himself. He was self-taught. So my report card would come home and he'd say, I don't understand why you got a bad mark in history because history is just memorization. He didn't understand that it was just totally boring.
Yeah. So after high school, off to university?
No, I didn't go to university for many reasons. My father couldn't afford to send me. I don't think I was emotionally ready for it, looking back on it now. So, what were girls to do when they left high school? You either became a secretary, a nurse, an airline stewardess, a teacher, I guess. So I chose a secretary. My father didn't like that part. And I did quite well. My first job was being secretary to the manager in the bank. So in those days, that was considered something. And my father liked that his daughter was a secretary.
Where was the bank?
Bank was situated in Val-d'Or.
Okay, so you hadn't left town yet.
No, I hadn't left town yet. I left town when I turned 18, and I realized, for the simple reason that many of my friends moved to Montreal. Some went to school, and some got jobs in Montreal, and that would have been a good choice for me, but I took the road less traveled. First of all, I was quite depressed because I no longer had friends around me. And I didn't have the initiative to look for something. And I saw an ad in the paper that needed something further north than I lived, in a mining town. So I applied. It was a secretarial job. I applied. And I found myself in a mining camp. For an 18-year-old, that's quite exciting.
For an 18-year-old girl.
I remember the manager, he actually cried when I left and said, "You're making the biggest mistake. And you're making the biggest mistake, why didn't you move to Montreal?" And my mother wanted me to move to Montreal.
Sure, of course.
But no.
Did you have an answer for him?
I was headstrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. I looked at it as an adventure.
Sure.
I had an adventurous spirit. I think I still do.
Yep.
But it didn't turn out well because I didn't meet the man of my dreams. It was traumatic for me because the person I married wasn't a good choice. I had 2 children, and then I left. At that time, there weren't places for single parents to go, and my parents were very supportive, so I came home. I took a lot for granted. I just expected my mother would look after the children, and she did.
You came home with the kids.
Oh, yes. I came home with the kids, and my mother looked after the children. My my grandfather was retired, and they were living in the same household. And we had 4 generations of a family. My father had built an apartment added to our house, and my grandparents lived there. My children were very secure, and so was I.
Sure. What year was this, Jania?
I'd say in the 60s, early 60s.
That must have taken an enormous amount of courage for you.
So at the time, because I think I left with my life.
Okay. Looking back, can you see how brave that was?
Well, yes, I can see that. But the other choice was I might not have survived.
Yeah. So you did what you had to
I did
do.
what I had to do. And it wasn't easy because now I was not married
Right.
and I was not single. There was a lot of discrimination. I still had some old friends that I knew for a long time. They were supportive.
Good.
My family was supportive.
Yeah.
My younger sisters had left home and they were not supportive because I had shamed the family. So I eventually moved to Toronto.
With the kids?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
First of all, I moved with my eldest daughter because I couldn't afford to support 2 children. And, we went home to visit, and eventually my other daughter came with me.
Did you come to Toronto with a job in hand or looking or
Looking.
looking?
Yes, looking. I stayed with a Ukrainian family.
Yes.
And that was very supportive as well.
Once again, bravery act number 2.
Thank you for that. I didn't think of it that way.
Got work.
Law office, and it was dry. It paid well.
But you didn't care for it.
No, I didn't care for being a secretary.
Can you tell us why not?
Yeah, things hopefully are different now. I mean, a legal secretary did have some status, but you were your boss's girl. You were expected to bring him coffee. Sometimes there were insults. It was something I had to do. It was amazing because I never did worry about money. So looking back on it now, even when I moved out on my own with my 2 children, it was sort of the Ukrainian in me who knew how to budget, and I knew what I needed to live on.
Yeah.
Of course, there were no savings, but it was difficult.
And then back to school.
And then, not quite,
Okay.
I remarried, and that didn't work out.
Oh.
I know.
Oops.
I did not make good choices.
I guess.
I did not make good choices. I hadn't had enough life's experiences,
Yes.
although outside it looked like I did.
Yeah.
But I had a son, and I'm thankful for my children too.
Sure.
And the men that were attracted to me looked for somebody, I don't think intentionally, but it was a very responsible person. And I think that I attracted, it's like yin and yang.
So you survived marriage number 2. And then did you go back to school?
Well, I worked for quite a while because I did need the money.
Sure.
And when my daughters had gone on to have their own lives,
Yeah.
my son was a teenager, I decided to further my education. So I did that initially part-time, and I got worked towards a BA. I did it at night, and then I also got my bachelor's of social work at night. And then I was out of money and got a job, Family and Children's Services. That was quite a rude awakening for me.
In what sense?
Well, Family and Children's Services kind of implies that you're working with families,
Yes.
but you're also there to take their children away from them if things go wrong,
Yeah.
if they don't follow the rules. And it's very schizophrenic. So I survived 2 years doing that. And then I was accepted in the master's program at U of T and Wilfrid Laurier. And I chose to go to Wilfrid Laurier only because I heard it was a better program. And so total, I went to school for 10 years. I was 40 when I started the journey, and I was 50 when I finished it. And mature students.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, where do I fit in all?
Yes.
You know, how will these children relate to me? And I remember standing in line at the cafeteria, and these kids were talking about their drunken night before, and kind of bragging about it. And I thought, ooh, this is much different. They loved me. They looked up to me,
Good.
and I had the greatest time of my life.
My goodness.
During my BSW years, doing it at night, we used to go to, a bunch of us, you know, from the same program, used to go to Swiss Chalet, and we'd close the place down. That was sort of like our unwind time. And I remember those times with such fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. What a great memory. And then did you get into the industry, into practice?
Definitely.
Okay.
As I said, after my BSW, I worked with children, but after
Right.
that, I worked with adults and mostly older people. So I initially started in a chronic care facility in Kitchener,
Okay.
where I was living at the time.
Yep.
Now I look back and I think, yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Now, but then you were a younger person.
I was a younger person.
Yeah.
And then I went to work for home care as a social worker, working in the community, and I really enjoyed that. Partly because the territory I had was in the country, and it was a very varied experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful experience.
It's quite rewarding to do significant work. It is. And those of us who are lucky enough to have done significant work, we're lucky.
And then when home care was decimated by Mike Harris, I looked for other work, and I had been working part-time for an agency, a national agency that contracted with businesses. And so I saw clients in the evening, and I liked that kind of work. So I didn't, except for my children, at that time I didn't have any ties, and they were grown and on their own. So I decided to move to Vancouver and work for that same agency.
Right.
And again, I guess it was pretty brave of me. I only got one day of work.
What happened?
Well, because that's all they could give me. And I worked up to 4 days a week, counseling people from all walks of life. And it was very rewarding as well. People appreciated me, and I appreciated them as well.
Okay.
So it ended on a good note.
Good. So my notes say that we should talk about travel.
Well, prior to my retiring, you know, I had traveled to Cuba. I had traveled to different Caribbean countries, and England, and Portugal. And I thought I would like to travel. And again, it was like solo travel. And I planned it all out, but I thought, how much traveling am I going to get done in my lifetime if I travel for 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there? So I decided that I was going to travel Western Europe on my own for 3 months. And I came home and I thought, oh, it's so nice to be home. Because after being away for 3 months, I missed the Canadian culture. Then, after a while, I thought, no, I've got to travel again. I've got the bug. How do I do that? So I went to work part-time, and another 3 years passed. So I started traveling in 2003. In 2006, I did another 3-month trip to Eastern Europe, again, solo. And I really enjoyed that. Came home and thought, well, this is not finished. So in 2009, I traveled to Asia. And the only way that I could do that, because traveling in Europe was simple. As a Canadian, you didn't
Sure.
at that time need a visa, even in Eastern Europe. So I went to an agency that got all my visas together. But I was on tours then. I didn't do this solo.
Right.
That was
Right.
too much. I traveled to China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and India. And a total of 4 months, because I went back to Thailand. It was January when I went back to Thailand. I thought, I'm not coming home in this cold. So
I'm staying here.
I stayed until February and went home via Hong Kong. And since then, just to quickly recap that, since I've moved back to Toronto, I've gone to Ukraine again and met some of my relatives. I went to Russia and met some of my relatives. I went to Romania and Turkey.
Exotic and somewhat dangerous places.
Yeah, and
It's not the Caribbean. Like you say, it's not the Caribbean.
that's what people said to me. I didn't have the sense to be afraid. I didn't have the thought that I was doing something magnificent. But when I was traveling, I met other travelers who did the same thing. So it seemed normal. For me, I realized today that Ukrainian culture and my family of immigrants helped to shape me, and possibly why I became so adventurous, but also a responsible human being, as Ukrainians are, and they're responsible and hardworking. I used to hear that all the time from people, that Ukrainians are hardworking, and I think I was.
Good.
But I think I owe it to them.
Do you ever think about your legacy?
Well, I think the same legacy as my parents and grandparents left for me. And the other thing is, when I have conversations with my children, my grown children today, they're meaningful conversations. I try to slip in, my life and my parents' lives, so they would know what came before them. And also, we talk about important things. We talk about politics. We talk about their lives. And I listen. I do not give my children advice. And I think it's living alone. For me, it's a blessing because I was a caregiver for so many years. And also, I think my personality is that I want to please other people. So living alone is about my independence, my continued, hopefully, independence, and my freedom.
Good.
And just caring for myself.
Well, thank you, Jania. I met you a couple years ago here, and every time I see you, I'm impressed.
Thank you.
I'm impressed with how you look. Every time we chat, I'm impressed with how big your heart is. And I'm so happy to know you.
That means a lot to me. My name is Jania, and I will be 87.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content every week. If you want to catch more of our adventures, check out the videos right here on our YouTube channel. And remember to leave a comment below. Let us know what you think or what you'd like to see next. We love hearing from you. Catch you in the next one.
On the next episode,
Holiday and special day coping for seniors.
Hi, this is about Valentine's Day. When I'm on my own on Valentine's Day, I don't sit around and feel sorry for myself. I become my own best Valentine. I buy myself a big bouquet of flowers and sometimes a flowering plant. And then I go downtown to do some mega shopping. There's nothing like retail therapy to drive the blues away.